Are you aware that your favorite rock singer, Sammy Hagar, hated this man more than anyone else? The bitterness he felt was not reserved for just anyone in the music world. It was reserved for one person who truly sparked his fury. Do you want to know who this person is? Grab your popcorn because this story has it all: betrayal, drama, and some seriously harsh words. Let's get into it.
I never really had a lot of respect for Dave. That wasn't anything I ever wanted to be. A guy like Dave was never somebody that I'd say, oh, I want to be like that. Truthfully, Dave, what I found out later, really into me in Montreal for 9 years. The 10th year in Van Halen, it just went sideways. Our manager died. Another manager came in. He started poisoning Ed now, saying, hey, Sammy thinks it's his band. Mike will tell you. It's like I was innocent. They just all turned on me because I didn't like this manager. We wanted a different manager. I wanted a different manager. And of course, this guy lasted 5 minutes and he was gone. So I was right in the end.
Sammy Hagar is a famous American rock singer, songwriter, and musician born on October 13, 1947, in Salinas, California. Hagar grew up in a working-class home and loved music from a young age. He first became famous as the lead singer of the rock band Montrose, where he showed off his powerful voice and stage personality. His career took off when Hagar took over as lead singer for Van Halen from David Lee Roth in 1985. During his time with the band, they made many great albums and hits that cemented his place in rock history. Hagar has had a great solo career and his work with Van Halen. He is known for his unique sound and high-energy performances. Besides being a musician, Hagar's work has been successful, but it has also been controversial, especially his troubled relationship with Eddie Van Halen. However, before proceeding, we need to go back to the beginning to fully understand how much Sammy Hagar and his friends hate each other. The Red Rocker, Sammy Hagar, was known for having a strong voice and electrifying shows. When he wasn't with Van Halen, he was having a great solo career with hits like I Can't Drive 55, making him a big deal in the rock world. At the same time, Van Halen was becoming very popular with David Lee Roth as their flashy lead singer. It was unclear what would happen to Van Halen after Roth left the band in 1985. They needed a new lead singer who could do a good job replacing Roth while also adding something different. Now comes Sammy Hagar. Everything looked good at first. Eddie and Alex Van Halen, Sammy's Van Halen brothers, hit it off right away. There was no denying the connection. They started making music that was both new and true to the hard rockin' roots of the band. They worked together to make some of Van Halen's most famous records, such as 5150 and OU 802. Fans liked the new way the band was playing, and their fame reached a whole new level. It looked like the perfect rock and roll match. There was a very strong bond between Sammy and Eddie. They jammed together for hours on end, pushing each other to be more creative. The result was a musical union that seemed like it was meant to be. 5150, their first record together, was a huge hit when it came out and went straight to #1 on the Billboard 200 chart. Why Can't This Be Love and Dreams were instant hits that marked the start of a new era for Van Halen. Not the same song, but it was still very powerful, and both old and new fans really felt it. It was easy to get along with Sammy in the beginning, and you were free to be creative. Eddie's guitar riffs and Sammy's strong singing came together to make a sound that was both new and old. The band was riding a wave of success that didn't seem like it would ever end. This winning streak continued with their next record, OU 812, which had hits like When It's Love and Finish What You Started. The record sold many platinum copies, solidifying Sammy's place in the band's history. But, as is often the case in rock and roll, things didn't stay good for long. Things started to get tense behind the scenes. Creative differences, emotional problems, and the stress of being famous began to get to them. Their bond, which used to be very strong, started to weaken. The willingness to work together that had helped them get started to fade, and fights and misunderstandings took its place. Even with these problems, the band kept making songs and touring a lot. The cracks were getting bigger, though. When For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge came out in 1991, you could feel the strain. Even though the record did well, it wasn't as easy to make as the others. There were a lot of disagreements during the process, and Sammy and Eddie's friendship, which used to be good, was pushed to the limit. In 1996, there were a lot of rumors and claims that made things worse. The official story was that Sammy quit the band, but things were actually a lot messier than that. Creative disagreements had turned into personal grudges, and the group that used to be close was now split. When Sammy left Van Halen, an era came to an end. Even though the band changed over the years, the magic of the Sammy years was something that could never be fully recreated. After that, Sammy and the Van Halen boys were honest about the time they spent together in the years that followed. It was clear that people were angry, especially between Sammy and Eddie. What began as a promising relationship turned sour, leaving behind great music that was tainted with personal conflict. Sammy Hagar's time with Van Halen is still an interesting part of rock history. It was a time of highs and lows, great music and deep disagreements. The early peace between Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen started to fall apart over time. There were problems in the band's creativity, problems between members, and the stress of being famous. Eddie was making things harder for Sammy to work with and more controlling. Sammy didn't seem to care as much about the band as Eddie did. Their fights showed up in their music, where each member tried to lead the band in a different direction. Even though their next record, OU 8 and 12, did well, it was also the start of clear signs that their relationship was getting worse. Eddie was more interested in trying out new sounds and complicated guitar riffs, while Sammy wanted to write more melodies and lyrics. This creative tug-of-war often made people in the company fight. One especially tense session showed how their growing disagreement showed. Eddie insisted on fully changing the structure of a song because he thought it needed a more complicated setup. Sammy, on the other hand, really wanted to keep the original, simpler form that put the focus on his voice. The argument turned into a yelling match because neither man would back down. Things got so heated that they almost turned into a physical fight. Even though they had problems, they were able to finish the record. The album OU 8 12 went on to have hits like When It's Love and Finish What You Started. But the strain that was there was now clear to everyone around them. The friendship that had once helped them work together creatively was now giving way to anger and disagreement. Both men were starting to feel stressed out from all of these fights. The rising anger was overshadowing the excitement and willingness to work together that had marked their early years. With each new project, they seemed to disagree more, and the gap between their creative ideas grew. The once unstoppable power of Van Halen was beginning to show signs of stress, which set the stage for their relationship to end in the end. Van Halen had a rough time in the mid-1990s, which reached a dramatic peak while they were making their album Balance. This relationship between Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen was getting more and more tense, and it was hard to ignore. As the band worked on the record, the once joyous friendship had turned into a tense and strained living together. There was so much fighting that it was hard for the members to share the workshop space without getting into a lot of trouble. Even though they tried hard to keep things business, the problems in their relationship showed up in their work. Balance, even though it did well at the box office, showed signs of this division. The darker tone of the record showed how unhappy and divided the band was becoming. Once Balance came out, it was a turning point, but the problems did not go away with it. The situation got even worse, which led to a major turning point. In 1996, Sammy Hagar and Van Halen chose to break up, ending an important part of the band's history. The official story was that Sammy was leaving to put his family first and work on his solo business. But the truth was much more complicated and full of unsolved problems. The final thing that caused them to break up was working on the music for the movie Twister. At its worst, Eddie Van Halen replaced one of Sammy's voice tracks without consulting him first, which made Sammy very angry. People saw this as a clear display of disrespect for Sammy's efforts to the band. Sammy got so angry because he felt pushed to the side and ignored that he quit the lessons. This important event made it clear that they would no longer be working together, and their relationship is now in a terrible mess. When they quit the band, it looked like the fights would end, but things got worse. In interviews, Sammy didn't hold back. He called Eddie a tyrant and the band a toxic place to be. Eddie, for his part, didn't hold back when he talked about how Sammy supposedly wasn't dedicated or hardworking. When the media, which is always looking for a good story, added fuel to the fire, the public show began to split the fans. The fight got worse when Sammy's autobiography, Read My Uncensored Life in Rock, came out in 2011. Sammy opened up about his rough time with Eddie and showed him as a troubled mind who was lost in chaos. He talked about times when Eddie showed up to practices obviously drunk and unable to contribute well. Sammy also talked about a heated argument they had over printing rights, which made their already tense relationship even worse. Following the publication of the book, Eddie did not remain quiet. In several appearances, he fought back against Sammy's claims, calling him ungrateful and unprofessional. Eddie said that Sammy was using the band's history to make money for himself, and asked him how dedicated he was to the music that had brought them together in the first place. They became more and more angry at each other over the years. Each person's failure to give in made the fight worse, turning their private grudge into a public spectacle that split fans. The story of their time together turned into a saga of hurt feelings and angry words, showing that even the most famous pairings can end badly sometimes. So, the breakup of Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen is a lesson in how hard it can be to work together on artistic projects. Even though many years have passed, their feud is still a vivid part of rock history. It shows how strongly personal and professional conflicts can connect and shape the course of people's lives long after the last chord has been played. There was a lot of excitement among Van Halen fans in 2004 when the band announced a long-awaited comeback tour with Sammy Hagar. Many fans were filled with hope and nostalgia when they heard the news. They were eager to see the famous lineup back together. It looked like old scars were finally getting better, and that Van Halen's magic would be back. But below the surface of this exciting news, the same old problems started to come up again, throwing a long shadow over the reunion. The tour quickly turned into a chaotic and argumentative event instead of a successful celebration of their legacy. Even though Sammy Hagar was back on stage with the band, he was once again caught up in the same problems that had happened when they worked together before. The tour itself was a big show of rock and roll. There was a lot of energy in the arenas because the shows were so exciting, and the crowds were so excited. But behind the scenes of this amazing show, Sammy and Eddie Van Halen's friendship was anything but happy. The once great team now looked like a shaky show, with the two rock stars barely getting along. One more sign that their relationship was getting worse was that they were traveling alone. The stress off stage was so strong that a knife could cut it. Sammy and Eddie tried to stay away from each other as much as possible, which made the band feel broken and awkward. They didn't talk to each other much, and the friendship that had characterized their time together was noticeably missing. During the tour, the tension hit a boiling point more than once. Even though Sammy was clearly mad at Eddie for acting up, he kept coming close to leaving. Houston, which should have been the top stop on the tour, was the site of one of the most exciting events. Instead, it turned into a place where fights broke out. Eddie's shaky act on stage caused a heated argument behind the scenes. Things quickly got worse, with tempers boiling and voices rising. At one point, things almost got violent, and the whole show looked like it might be canceled. Eddie's behavior made Sammy very angry, and it wasn't just because he felt betrayed and disrespected. Instead of making things better, the meeting seemed to make Sammy feel even worse about Eddie. The reality that they were facing was much less exciting than their dream of rekindling their old greatness. Eddie Van Halen's fight with cancer made this story more interesting. Even though they didn't get along, Sammy reached out to Eddie when he was sick. In his autobiography, Red, My Uncensored Life in Rock, Sammy wrote about how crazy their relationship was. He said that even though he didn't like how things turned out, he still admired Eddie's musical skills and accomplishments. When Eddie died in 2020, Sammy was one of the first people to talk about how sad he was. While he recognized their troubled past, he also praised the amazing music they made together. It was a moving lesson that even the worst rivalries can have times when people get along. Sammy's ode to Eddie was very moving. Heartbroken and speechless, he wrote on social media, "My love to your family." He talked about the last time he talked to Eddie in interviews and said he felt bad that they didn't have more time to fix their friendship. He also talked about the good times they had together in the early days, even though things were crazy. There was a lot more going on between Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen than just differences at work. It was a very personal and emotional feud. The anger Sammy had toward Eddie wasn't just a result of their rocky relationship. It was a result of a deep-seated betrayal. Sammy's anger wasn't just caused by different musical ideas or the hard work of the job. It came from feeling betrayed and let down in his personal life. Besides being in the same band as Eddie, Sammy used to think of Eddie as a close friend. In the beginning of their work together, they respected each other and came up with great ideas together. But as time went on, Sammy thought Eddie's actions were hurting their relationship, and Van Halen's reputation more and more. Eddie's moodiness and tendency to be dominating made things unstable, which stifled creativity and made relationships more difficult. For Sammy, the charismatic guitarist turned into a source of anger and mental turmoil. His brilliance had once been an inspiration. There was a big effect on Sammy's health from Eddie's deeds. A lot of the time, Sammy talked about how the fight made him feel. Issues that kept coming up, and Eddie's unpredictable behavior ruined what could have been a fun creative process. Their music used to be about working together, but now it was a fight where egos were clashing and trust was broken. Sammy was even more angry because he thought Eddie's lack of dependability was hurting not only their working relationship, but also their chances of success as a group. There were times when Sammy thought about giving up music for good. Eddie's behavior was so stressful for him that it was threatening to take away from his love for his work. It showed how much the fight hurt him that he was thinking about giving up his singing career. Sammy thought that Eddie's instability and willingness to work with others were big problems that kept them from becoming even more creative. Sammy thought Eddie's actions were not only a string of bad choices, but also a deep breach of the trust and friendship they had once shared. The emotional damage that their fights caused was a reminder of how personal fights can affect work relationships, leaving scars that last long after the music stops. For Sammy, the memory of their time together would always be tainted by the anger over their fight, which was very different from the times when they worked well together and were successful. After all was said and done, Sammy's hate for Eddie was a complicated web made of hurt, disappointment, and a deep sense of betrayal. The once promising relationship had turned into a dramatic story of ego clashes and broken dreams, leaving behind a legacy that was tainted by the painful truths of their troubled relationship. The Hagar-Van Halen feud remains one of rock's most notorious sagas, illustrating how passion and creativity can sometimes spark intense conflict. Their story is a testament to the volatile nature of artistic collaborations and the profound impact they can have on those involved. Despite the turbulence, both Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen made significant contributions to the music world. Their time together in Van Halen resulted in an array of iconic rock anthems that continue to resonate with fans old and new. Van Halen's legacy is indeed multifaceted, characterized by two distinct yet influential periods, one with the flamboyant David Lee Roth and the other with the dynamic Sammy Hagar. Each era brought unique qualities to the band, contributing to its lasting influence on rock music. For Sammy, his time with Van Halen was a double-edged sword, providing him with extraordinary visibility and success, yet also exacting a heavy emotional toll. The complexity of their story adds depth to the narrative of rock and roll history, highlighting both the highs and lows of their remarkable journey. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Sammy Hagar's intense feelings towards Eddie Van Halen, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. And check out the video popping up on your screen for another fascinating story. See you next time.